Hello, this is Bobby Cappuccio. Thank you for joining me for another PT on the Net video interview. Today we're going to be talking about some trends around mixed martial arts training in the fitness industry. My guest today is Martin Rooney. Martin, thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here, Bobby. Always a pleasure.
Now, Martin, you've trained some of the top MMA fighters in the world for nearly 2 decades. Before we get started, would you mind briefly telling us, just to build the context for this, who some of those people have been?
Well, over the last 2 decades, I started working with the Gracie family, which were the original, the fighting family of MMA. And over that span of time, I've worked with dozens of UFC fighters, including current UFC champion Frankie Edgar, as well as former UFC champion and one of the most popular guys in MMA, Forrest Griffin. So those are 2 really big names, as well as many, many other top fighters like Dan and Jim Miller that are fighting now in the UFC. So you've got a lot of background and experience training a lot of the top guys.
So tell us, given your experience, what are some of the trends that you see emerging in the fitness industry around the popularity of MMA?
Yeah, well, as the popularity has grown, and just like it has in any field, when popularity grows, people want a piece of it. And what's gone on is MMA has exploded. If you noticed, 10, 15 years ago, on the cover of every fitness magazine, it was either a bodybuilder or it was an NFL star, because those were the sports that guys had the physiques that maybe guys wanted. But because they were unrealistic in many ways, now MMA seems to be on the cover of every magazine because it's a more normal looking guy, but that ripped hard look that they have, so everybody wants that. The challenge has become, the trend that I see is the way they think that they achieve that is by doing what I like to call the circuit of death, or just crazy metabolic circuits to the point that people are left either lying almost half unconscious in a pool of sweat or throwing up in a garbage can, which unfortunately is the wrong application of the stimulus.
And it's horrible for the other members.
Oftentimes that's not a good experience, although interesting enough, as horrible as it may seem, unfortunately, it actually attracts more people to it, where I've noticed in training right now, another trend is people value soreness, novelty, and fatigue more than they value results. So people think, wow, I'm really banged up from that, or oh, I'm so sore from that, wow, that must have been great. Yet they haven't lost any body fat, they haven't gained any strength, and actually now they're injured so they can't train as much, but they still think that they're doing something great. And that's where I think what we have to do is really check ourselves as a community of, hey, when we get a new tool, which metabolic training could almost call it as a tool, we got to really learn how to apply it.
Now, Martin, by the time somebody gets to the point where they see no results, it's too late, because either you've injured them in the worst case scenario, or you've lost them as a client as the best case scenario. What are some of the markers that we can look at to determine whether or not our clients are overtrained in the process?
Well, what I would say is none of the sessions should be geared towards all-out fatigue. Unfortunately, it's almost as if we don't monitor anything, so we can't measure anything. If we're not looking at heart rate or what kind of response we're having with a person, but now they're half unconscious on the ground in a pool of cold sweat, having a sympathetic nervous system response because of what they've just done to themselves, we've gone too far. If people feel nauseous or almost pass out, they're not physically prepared for what you've just put them through, and it's a horrible stimulus for them. But overall, other pieces would be any kind of soreness or injury that now they're actually working out again in another circuit, but they haven't recovered from the one previous to that, or even just the physical mindset of not wanting to do it. These are all signs of overtraining where, hey, too much of anything is a bad thing. If I take and eat a whole bottle of vitamins, I can kill myself too, even though you might think a vitamin is good. The same stuff is happening, I believe, in metabolic training.
So let's move away from what not to do. What's some advice you would give as to what exactly to do?
Some of the stuff that I would say right off the point is, first, know your client. What are they prepared for? I see people every day in gyms swinging hammers that are too heavy, trying to flip a tire they can't flip with bad technique because they're either too weak or not strong enough or don't have the physical capacity to even perform the circuit in the first place. So first, know your person. Next, what I would say is make sure you're monitoring recovery. What I always say is the first thing that I build into my training programs is the amount of recovery. I don't first build in everywhere I'm going to train and then think that recovery is expendable, just like we think about sleep and nutrition most of the time. But it's where am I recovering from this stimulus so I can get better and then do it again? And then the final piece would be to really monitor the intensity of the exercise itself. What happens is you've got a person that's not prepared, they're not recovered, and then you are you're tripling the intensity on it for the second or third time that they do it because you think you're tough, and all of a sudden, now the person's really destroyed. That's not what we want for the fitness industry. I think the metabolic circuit is something that can get people better. I think it's gonna be the future in many ways of a lot of training because what it does to people mentally and physically, but we have to apply it correctly or we can drive as many people out of fitness as we want to get into it.
Good point. Thank you, Mark.